Hey, Mitch, great. Thank you once again for joining me on the Question Guy podcast. Of course, these are special editions because we are talking about how to hire and keep great people, the book that you wrote. And it's been out for about a year now. And so I think it's doing pretty good. And as you know, I always get really interested because there's so much insight, not just about leadership, but just really about, building core values. If you want to run a team, if you want to be part of a team, if you want to be an entrepreneur and all that cool stuff. So right now we're in chapter 6. Let me give us the title. And this is kind of a really weird title. More than fancy buildings, pretty flowers, and bright lights. And then in parentheses, the art of leadership and interpersonal growth. So in a very short chapter, it's like a couple pages long, you go pretty deep into interpersonal growth. At least we're starting to. So with that being said, you've got 4 questions at the end of the chapter. Given time, I'd only like to cover the first 2, but I actually think that they're most powerful questions here. Are you ready for the first one?
Let's go.
Okay. So question number 1 reads, what opportunities could your organization provide for your team that would create opportunities for interpersonal growth? And so, like I said, we're now getting into the heart and soul of people.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. When you ask me that question, I'm just reflecting on a few conversations I've had this week about this very subject, really. And those conversations led me to actually make a post on LinkedIn this morning, not realizing what chapter we were going to be talking about during this recording. So it's kind of that syncope that happens in life sometimes. But
it happens a lot in our conversations, actually.
Oh yeah, we can go deeper into that at some point in time. That's not for today. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And so this morning, one of my posts on LinkedIn was, what's the most important word in the phrase human resources? It's not resources. The most important word is human.
Right.
The problem, and again, I often say this, I for some reason, a few months ago, I had a couple of podcast interviews that, like 3 podcast shows I was on in a row, they really wanted to dig into HR. And because I talk recruiting, hiring, and culture, I often get pushed into kind of the HR world. The challenge with that is most HR people don't have decision-making power. And so sometimes it becomes really difficult as a consultant to kind of dance in the topics of HR, but I also have to talk to the decision makers to book a gig or to book a consultation. And so that's an interesting game, which I actually think, again, another conversation for another day. I'm always saddened that HR people don't have decision-making ability. Here's why, and here's where I was going.
Okay.
Unfortunately, most people in HR positions, whether they're directors, department heads, whatever, they are mandated and tasked with a few different things. Making sure policies are in order, and that can go under safety policies, regulations, whatever. Make sure policies are in order. Oftentimes, with many companies, they're tasked with some portion of accounting? Which could be benefits or payroll. You see that often in smaller companies. HR gets lumped into finances and accounting, especially on the benefits side. The other and third element they're normally tasked with is training. So
yeah, of course,
an employee gets hired, HR deals with them, then HR sends them through training. Here's the problem with all of that.
Uh-oh.
All of that, I would put, if we have 2 words, human resources, everything I just mentioned falls under the resources side.
The training, the accounting.
Yes, paperwork, policies, regulate, that's all resources. Very rarely do most human resource departments actually get to deal with the human side. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, Mitch, they deal with complaints. You go to HR for complaints. Great, that's reactive, not proactive. So my proposal constantly to organizations is Capitalize the human, lowercase the resources. Because if you take care of the human proactively, the resources will always end up in a great result. So let's say HR deals with training. Well, that's kind of human. Well, it is, but not if you're only focused on the task and the office tour and assigning a desk and a name tag. Those aren't humane. Those are resources. Humane says, Keith, we want to know about your emotional capacity. We want to know what lights you up. We want to know where you feel most empowered. We want to know what tasks and jobs really connect with your deepest being. We're not going to train you on anything else until we know what your capacity as a human is. And once we know that, then we're going to align you in the proper seat on the bus. Because if people aren't in the right seat in the bus, then our bus is going to be chaos, and we don't want chaos. But the reason we have to focus on resources is because everything is chaos. And so we've reversed and reverted the common sense approach. And the common sense approach is we are human resources. So we deal with the humanity of everyone first, then we deal with all the other stuff. So what does that have to do with the question? What is your organization doing to create opportunities for interpersonal growth?
Okay, and there's the keyword, interpersonal growth.
Yes, that's the kicker. What are you doing proactively to bring the humanity back to your employees, to bring the human back to human resources? If human resources is going to be the department that deals with all this, then how much humanity are they getting to spend time on? I was just having lunch with a friend, and he was complaining, and not kidding, he was complaining about his company. And the part of the reason he was complaining is he said, I got an interesting call at 7 o'clock this morning. And I said, what was that? And he said, it was one of my coworkers calling me because they needed to vent about some things that the boss had said to her.
Wow.
And they needed someone to vent to. And my friend said, don't you think that's kind of what an HR team is for? And I said, not if the boss has intimidated them and told them to not go to anyone else but the boss. HR will never be able to fulfill their true purpose, human resources. So for that company, like many, many, many other companies, it's human resources, not human resources. And so it's a whole paradigm shift. Now, where does the chaos come in? The chaos comes in here. Most people in HR director positions don't have the power from the organization to change human resources, because most of them have not been given cultural decision-making empowerment. Most of them are told, you make sure the resources are taken care of, make sure everyone has a name tag, make sure everyone's set up on payroll, then you've done your job. That's just the resources side. In fact, I wish we wouldn't call it human resources. I wish we would just call it resources, because no one's dealing with the humanity of it. And so then the question is, what is your organization doing to create opportunities for interpersonal growth? That must be the focus. If you're listening to this or watching this, and you're tired of having to hire people because people are quitting, you're tired of low performance, you're tired of people complaining, as a leader, you're stressed, you're freaked out, you don't know what to do next, and you're working 60 plus hours a week, then you have a human problem, not a systematic problem. And once you solve the human problem, the systematic problem turns itself around. I'll give you another perfect example, and then we'll go on to the next question. Okay. I had a client just this week. It's a current paying client just this week. Tell me, these are his exact words. Mitch, before we hired you, we had all the systems in place. Our people knew what to do. They knew how to do it, and they were doing it. The problem was we were losing people right and left. We hired them. They stayed for 6 months. They quit. Our management team wasn't great. We weren't strong. Nothing was working, but we had all the systems in place. And I said, so what was wrong? And he goes, we were missing the most important piece. And I said, what's that? And he goes, the human piece. We weren't developing humans. We were creating robots, and humans don't like to be robots.
Yeah. We don't.
So we took one of their locations, and in the last 45 days, they hired a new GM, turned the team around by 90%. They have 0 call-ins. People aren't showing up late. Performance is great. They had just had a re-grand opening, revenues flowing in. Everything's happening. And he can now compare his locations and blatantly identify the differences between the location we've worked on and the locations we're about to work on.
Cool.
And his response is, in his words, the piece we were missing was the human piece. And I preach this until I'm blue in the face, and I will argue it until the day I die. If you're putting the resources before the human, you will always have headaches. If you put the human before the resources take care of themselves. All day, every day, that's how human behavior works. Psychology tells us that. The medical field tells us that. Science tells us that. Human behavior tells us that. It all tells the same story. Put humans first, get that piece right, everything else works out on its own, usually. Now, you have to have some systems and strategies in place. I get it. But humans always come before systems and strategies every single day of the week. So again, what opportunities are you creating for interpersonal
You haven't
growth?
answered that yet, and we're still doing
Well, I can't. I can't, because that's up to them to answer. And that's why I go back to the red flag that I see in most organizations. And when I ask leaders,
well,
hey, who
let me
takes
ask
care
you
of
a
your
question then. Let me ask you a question.
do it.
So culture, the whole piece is you're going to build culture. You're going to build culture in these organizations that reflect humanity, the human experience, the human empowerment.
Yes.
And so why can't you answer the question? If the right culture is in place,
Yes.
then you should be able to answer this question. What are you doing for your people?
Yeah, so the answer, and the reason it's hard to answer blatantly is because it truly is up to the organization from the standpoint of what they choose to do. Suggestions would look like, the other day I was talking to another client and we were having this exact conversation, and suggestions for them look like
Serendipity, man.
can you budget $5,000 a year to enroll your leaders in one class a semester at your local community college? Yes.
That was really?
Yep.
Was
And they're going to do that. That's
okay.
their plan. Can you invest $2,500 a year to buy every one of your employees a leadership book every quarter? Yes, easy. Can you do little things like have monthly team meetings where you bring your whole team together, not at work, somewhere else, and you just live life together, have an hour or two, a party, whatever you want to do to celebrate your team? Can you do that? Yes, easily. It doesn't cost much money. Little things. Let's get even smaller. Can you buy gift cards for your team? For their birthday, whatever. Can you do coffee Fridays? Whatever. Now, the kicker to those are you can go as small scale as you want, all the way up to, again, a $10,000 a year budget for enrolling people in classes, whatever that looks like for your organization. The kicker is what someone else I was engaging with on LinkedIn this morning, they had a great phrase and they said, but be careful because that can't become fake culture. And that person was exactly right. That those have to be results of we want to invest in our people, not our people are complaining, so we're going to put a Band-Aid over the problem, which is what the majority of organizations do. Well, our people want better culture, so we're going to have pizza Fridays. That's fake culture. Healthy culture says, no, we want to make sure that our leaders know we invest in them. So we're going to let them enroll. We're going to give them a scholarship every semester to take a leadership course at our local community college, and we're going to pay for it. We're going to have cohorts and we're going to have book clubs, and we're going to really push this thing forward to let people know we are investing in you because we care, not because you complain. And those are two very different motivations. And so the answer to the question is, I can give you a ton of ideas, but we have to back out to a 50,000 foot view and go, but what's the real problem? And that's why I love that question, because it's what opportunities are you creating to create opportunities for your people to grow. And so it's like, okay, what are we really doing here then? And that becomes the real question. And that's, well, I never want to discount people in leadership positions because it's not easy work. It is not easy for a leader to fall back and go, look, we've screwed this whole thing up. We're going to start over. Fortunately, those are the types of leaders I do my best to only work with. I call it willingness. If a leader is willing, then we can walk through and drastically change culture in 30 to 45 days, no ifs, ands, or buts. It's easy to do if you have the willingness. And what's crazy is this client that I was telling you about, where we, the one that said we were missing the human piece, that leader and ownership group were 100% willing. They were 100% willing to work with me, to let me come in, to take their new managers under my wing and put them through boot camps. And what they're seeing now is the incredible dividends that it pays when you have willingness and open-mindedness. They were willing to look at themselves in the mirror, to see their reflection and go, we can't do it on our own. And guess what? Most people can't. I can't, you can't, they can't. We need an outsider to guide us through that, because that outsider isn't blinded by the fires that they're having to put out every day. And so, my suggestion is be as creative as possible. Get your culture built and resonate that culture with creating opportunistic investments in the interpersonal growth of your people. If you do that, you will have zero problem finding employees. Zero. Because most of them you're going to find are going to be great and they're not going to leave. That's the result. So long answer, but it's so important. It's so important because people don't think of that. They just don't.
With that in mind, I really don't want to ask the second question because
you have to.
Well, I'm going to, but 2, 3, and 4 then are mute ideas, because all the value of what you wanted to communicate through chapter 6 was right there in this conversation.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and talk question number 2. What steps are you taking daily to provide greater depths of clarity? And we've talked about clarity before. Actually, that's one of your sub themes throughout the book.
Yes.
The greater knowledge and understanding a team has, the less they have to stop and think. And that's actually, again, interwoven throughout the chapters. The less they have to stop and think, the more often they simply respond to situations based on the clarity that they have.
Yeah, it's very similar to, and I'm sorry for people that maybe didn't play athletics, but that was my background, and it's very similar to playing sports. And I both played and coached for a long time. When you're a player, the worst mistake that can happen is you're not given room and space to just play the game. The worst thing that can happen is that your coach doesn't put you in positions to be independent. And the reason that's a major mistake in most sports is because things are happening so fast. I mean, you're engaging, reacting, responding, thinking within milliseconds. Like it just has to be innate. It just has to be responsive. You just have to go. And if you're ever in a scenario that you have to stop and think, you're too late. You're too late. It's not going to work. And as a coach, you want to empower your athletes to just do what they do. I don't want you to think about it. I want you to know everything so well and so thoroughly and have so much clarity that you can now empower your athleticism and perform at your highest level possible. And if you talk to any great athlete, they will tell you, the worst thing I can do is think. The best thing I can do is act, because I know it so well. My body knows it so well that I just perform. I just go. Talk to an artist, a musician, a speaker, a writer. It's called getting in the groove. They're not thinking, they're in rhythm. It's just happening. That is the highest optimum performance for a human. So when you look at that from an employee standpoint, the question becomes, how can I put myself in a position that they have so much clarity, so much understanding, so much knowledge that they don't have to think anymore? They can just simply perform. And when you can build that cycle and culture of performance where everyone is independent, everyone is autonomous, everyone has such clarity, it is incredible. It's synergy in motion. It's like listening to the greatest orchestra in the history of mankind. Everyone knows their part. Everyone's playing their part to the best of their ability, and no one's having to think about it. And that's what that question lends to is, have you as a leader created so much clarity that your people don't have to think? It just happens. And to me, you can't replicate that outside of humanity. Sure, you can automate it. You can automate it through technology. You can automate it through AI. You can automate it through other things, but you can't replicate the humanity of it. And the humanity of it is the synergy. It's the synergy of people working together to achieve something greater than any of them could achieve on their own. And so that's what you're really wanting to bring to the table. And to create that, you have to put people in positions of opportunity. It doesn't just go, it doesn't just kind of unfold by happenstance. It has to be strategic. You have to create opportunities for people to grow, which goes back to, what are you doing to create those opportunities? What are you doing when someone needs to be tested? What are you doing to turn up the heat just enough to give them the confidence to pass the test? When someone needs recovery, what are you doing to create a safe space for them to take a moment to breathe and recover? When someone needs growth, what are you doing to stretch them, not beyond their compensation, not beyond their capacity, but stretch them to where it just pulls them far enough that they gain that confidence to move further? And that is the art of leadership. That is the art of interpersonal growth. It's saying, I can position my team in a place that they can take risks, but when they don't quite meet the standard, they can recognize it, reflect on it, and learn from it. And then we no longer have a team making mistakes. We actually have a team that's taking risks to learn. But that is very strategic. Most organizations and leaders don't do that strategically. They do it by happenstance, and here we go. And then you often find leaders that scenario happens and it doesn't work out, and then they get pissed off, and then it just goes from there. It's like, no, we don't have time for all of that. We have time to really tap into the capacity of humanity. When we do that, everything else works out beautifully.
Well, that was a beautiful statement. And thank you so much. So that actually really does cover the heart and soul of chapter 6 of how to hire and keep great people. Mitch Gray, thank you again for a special edition of the Question Guy podcast, and we'll see you next time. Take care.